Thank you. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it just a couple of minutes for everybody to jump on here, and then we'll get started with the webinar today. So I appreciate you all taking the time to be here today. We'll get started very shortly. Okay, everybody, we're going to give it just a few more seconds and then we'll get started today. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Becky Anderson and I'll be leading the webinar today. And today we are going to be talking about inspection questions and some guidance for our fire inspectors and also for our insurance inspectors. So as we're looking through things. So let's go ahead and get started. So as I said, I'm Becky Anderson. I've been working in safe chemical management in schools for about the last 30 years, 25, 30 years, so quite a long time. I'm a bench chemist by trade. I also do a lot of training and teaching in industry on environmental compliance and safety strategies for chemical management. I am a certified firefighter. I've been and I've also been an emergency response technician or EMT for a few years. I no longer do that. But I still work very closely with our fire inspectors locally to help them know what to look for as they're in schools walking around. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Okay. And I'm having troubles getting this to move forward. There we go. Okay. So technical tips, just real quick for you from EPA. We're going to be using the chat. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments on anything, please go ahead and jump into the chat and we will we'll answer either as we have time or at the end, or if it's something really extensive, I might ask you to take it offline and then we'll talk more about it at a later date. So also if you have troubles hearing anything or sound, any of the audio settings down at the lower left, you can check on those. And then we do have the cameras disabled and we have the hand waving thing, question and answer thing. That's also the raised hand is also disabled. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into this stuff for today. So, sorry, I'm gonna go ahead and shut off my video so we can concentrate on the photos that are on the screen. And one of the things I do want to share with you today is that all the photos that you're going to see in the pictures are either situations that I've run into, or they're situations that Dave Waddell, who is one of my mentors in the Rehab the Lab program, they're situations that he's run into. So these are actual pictures that we've seen at a lot of different schools. And what that, the main message I want you to understand from that is that these chemicals are out there. And it's going to take a concerted effort across the country. We've had some states that have jumped in and focused financial resources and focused personnel resources on removing these legacy chemicals and these dangerous chemicals, but we certainly do not have this completed all across the United States. So I want you to know that these things are still out there. Just as a quick review of the last few webinars, we've worked with schools, school personnel and teachers to recognize and assess if they have these old chemicals, which we call legacy chemicals, or if they have unnecessary chemicals that they aren't using. And we've worked on spent time in the webinars with science folks, art teachers, industrial technology, and also our maintenance staff. So one of the things that we focused on is minimizing the risk overall for the schools so that we can by identifying which chemicals that we don't any longer need, or which chemicals are too old or too dangerous or in too large of a quantity. We've also talked about different requirements, and I'll go into this a little bit more, but today's focus specifically is going to be for fire departments, fire inspectors, and insurance carriers. These folks typically inspect schools annually, and I think this is a really strong opportunity for those folks to gain some additional knowledge on what to look for so that they can identify chemical risks and then also offer corrections and support the schools in identifying resources to come in and clean out anything that is a legacy chemical, old, unwanted, or too dangerous. It is a really strong opportunity, and I feel like over the last few years, we have missed that opportunity. I've worked with a number of fire inspectors over the years, and one of the things that I found is that they just kind of skim over the top of the chemical storage areas because they really don't know what questions to ask and what to look for. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. And boy, I'm having a heck of a time getting my presentation to move forward today. So let's see if we can get, there we go. All right, so quick refresher on, or a final few housekeeping items. Please make sure that if you have any questions that you post them in the chat. And again, we'll take a look and answer those as either through the presentation or at the end of the presentation. Also, this information is being presented in 2024. So if you're watching this webinar at a later date, please know that the technology, the understanding, and the regulations may have very well changed. So it's up to you. It's your responsibility to go in and make sure that you understand what the current regulations are. We're covering things from 2024 that are pertinent and accurate at the time. But again, they may have changed if you're watching this at a later date. Good grief. Okay, there we go. So we have 10 webinars that we've completed so far. And in those 10 webinars, they've been predominantly focused at teachers and staff and administrators to evaluate all the different chemicals throughout the school, what's needed and used, as well as any of those excess chemicals that are just simply there presenting more risk. These have been designed to help teachers and staff understand regulatory compliance requirements and also not just the regulatory requirements, but also best practices. So what have we seen over the years that's worked well? And the overall goal is to make teaching operations and school operations as absolutely safe as possible. Teachers and staff have learned how to identify highly hazardous chemicals, legacy chemicals, and they've also learned how to identify how many chemicals they have on site that are not necessary or may very well have higher levels of risk than they have utility in the classroom. This does not mean, as inspectors go in though, that all of these chemicals have been removed. So please know that we still continue to see schools throughout the country that have legacy chemicals and have very large quantities of unwanted and unused chemicals. We've also talked about disposal regulations and what's required. And one of the things I want to emphasize is those things are very state specific. In New Hampshire, there's a program for schools to get support and ask questions through the, it's Vicki, I can't remember, is it Department of Environmental Quality in New Hampshire?
It's Department of Environmental Services.
Environmental Services, thank you. I couldn't remember what that last word was. I appreciate that. So, and that's different than in the state of Vermont. So please know that before you go and dispose of anything, you really need to ask for some help. Take a look at their websites. The websites for both Vermont and New Hampshire are absolutely outstanding. So please make sure that you understand the disposal requirements. If you are an inspector and you're going through and advising these folks that they need to downsize and get rid of these unwanted legacy chemicals or chemicals that are dangerous, please make sure that you have a baseline understanding of who those schools can call for help. And if you need additional assistance, if you have any questions about that, please reach out to me. My email will be on the last slide of the presentation here. We've worked with students and teachers to understand, or excuse me, teachers and staff to understand that they also need to have a current inventory of the chemicals that they use. They need to understand and identify where the safety measures are in their classrooms. And they need to have a written chemical hygiene plan on site with a designated safety officer. So this can get very overwhelming. So if any of you need any assistance in pulling all of those pieces together, or if you're an inspector and you want to know the details of those, please reach out to me. Okay. All right, typically fire inspectors and insurance risk managers conduct a walkthrough annually. I've worked on this stuff for 25 years with K-12 schools, community colleges, universities, and a lot of times the facility will say, oh, we're in really good shape. We've cleaned everything out. There's nothing here that you're going to find. I want to make sure that you're not misled by those statements that everything is great. And I would like you, if you are an inspector, to dig deep anyway. And the reason for that is there are times that I found over the years that schools are really unaware of the level of risk that they have. And because of that, they just don't assess it correctly. And they almost need additional help and additional eyes in evaluating that level of risk. So please make sure that you don't miss the opportunity when you are in the schools to take a look and really dig deep, okay? We're going to focus on 3 areas for inspection strategies. The first thing we're going to start with is helpful equipment for your inspections. And we're going to go into a series of questions that you should ask when you're on site. We're also then going to talk about preparations. So in the event that while you're on site, that you find something that is of significant concern, what are you going to do? Who are you going to call? What action steps are you going to assist the school to take? And then finally, we're going to talk about strategies for, to help the school achieve safe chemical management as a whole. And we're going to go through quite a few different things. We'll touch on those pretty quickly. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Okay, one of the first places to start is what regulations do even impact, are schools even impacted by? And one of the things I want you to understand is, again, this varies a great deal from state to state. So please know that you, again, have to check with your state to learn what the specific regulations are that are governing it. One of the things I get a lot of questions about from and I teach a lot of firefighters throughout the United States. And one of the questions that I get a lot is, well, are they actually in violation of any fire codes? In Iowa, we've recently switched from the NFPA to the IFC, so National Fire Prevention Agency or Administration, up to the International Fire Code. And upon that switch, what we saw was that the IFC rules and regulations, as well as the NFPA, typically are not violated from a quantity perspective. So what that means is that schools generally don't hit the quantities that they are to be regulated, that they're out of compliance with NFPA or IFC regulations. That those quantity limits are designated and identified more for industry. And in schools, what we see is we see very small quantities of chemicals. So it's nothing for us to have every container in a chemical science stock room to be less than, probably the maximum would be either 4 liters, or sometimes we get old containers that are 1 gallon or 2 gallon containers. Occasionally we will see 5 gallon buckets of formaldehyde solutions in biology that contain specimens, but that's really the largest that we see. So focusing on quantity storage limits is really not the best strategy. And I'm going to encourage you instead to look at things like chemical compatibilities, safety preparations, and the risk associated with chemicals, and if it exceeds the utility of the instruction that the teacher is trying to work on. Those are the violations that may come, and frankly, I have not seen over 25 years, I've seen very few times where we've actually seen fire officials cite schools for violations. I think everybody really wants to work to support the schools, and that's the approach that most fire inspectors take. That's also been my experience with insurance inspectors. Nobody wants to be the bad guy, and I think what everybody wants to do is just help and assist as much as possible so that we mitigate the risk, but the teachers still have the ability to teach what they need. DEA, DPH, OSHA, and EPA are also all regulations that the schools fall under. And it's everything from making sure that they have a chemical hygiene plan to personal protective equipment and respiratory protection. There are some requirements on quite a few requirements on proper disposal as well. And one of the things that I want you to pay attention to if you're inspecting schools is I want you to look under the sinks in the science lab and see if there's any corrosion. That's kind of a telltale sign that we've got chemicals going down the drain that should not be going down the drain. Before we even get on site, I want you to start thinking about your own safety. So for any of our folks that are inspectors that are going on site, please make sure that you don't go alone into any of these areas. Make sure that you either have a school staff person, faculty person, administrator with you. And I think it's beneficial to actually have 2 inspectors, if at all possible. It's kind of a divide and conquer thing, and I think it would help immensely to have 2 people there. Make sure, though, that as you're working in the school areas, particularly in the science lab, in the stock room, that you are not in there alone. Again, we see a lot of risk in there, and I want to make sure that you're protected. One of the things that I see inspectors miss a lot is they often do not have safety glasses on, and they do not have vapor resistant or solvent resistant safety goggles with them. I would really encourage you to make sure that you have those and that you also have chemical resistant gloves with you in case you do decide to move anything or touch anything. A mirror and an intrinsically safe flashlight are also very, very helpful. We have to remember that some of these chemical stock rooms that we go into, they have poor lighting, they have rotten ventilation, and they have 4 and 5 layers or rows of chemicals that are stacked on the shelves. You'll want to be able to take a look at all of those. Now, does that mean that you have to handle every single container? I'm going to tell you absolutely not. In fact, the less you can handle, the better off you're going to be. What I'd like you to do as you're inspecting is just evaluate, okay, are these legacy chemicals? And is the teacher truly using all of these chemicals? It is not unheard of at all. In fact, most schools that I went into for initial inspections, when I would ask the teachers, hey, do you really use all this stuff? Almost, I would say, and I never kept statistics, but I would say a good 90% of them would look at me and go, no, I inherited all this stuff. And everything that I use is on these 2 shelves over here. Everything else, I don't touch, I don't use it, I don't want it in here. And that happened much more frequently than when we walked in and said, hey, do you use all this stuff? And the teacher was like, yeah, I have to have all of it. That was a big rarity. And that also kind of set off some red flags about, are you really using it, or are you just really like having a lot of chemicals around? Keep in mind, you'll want a mirror, and the reason that I say that is you'll want to be able to take that mirror and look at the backs of the chemical shelves and the containers that are in the back. And the easiest way that I've found to do that is with a mirror. I used dental hygiene mirrors were very helpful because they're real small, and yet you can still see quite a bit with them. I also used a rear view mirror, like from a car for a while. And that worked pretty well because then I could read what the names of the chemicals were. And it was it just seemed to work really well. It was a good shape. It was long and skinny, and I could fit it above the lids of the containers and still reach the back of the shelves. When you are in inspecting, one of the things that I want you to pay attention to is the vapors and the particulates. I want you to pay attention to the ventilation. A lot of times our chemical stock rooms do not have good ventilation at all. If there is a way for you to increase that ventilation before you enter the room, either through opening windows in the classroom and then putting a box fan in front of the door, seeing if you can, blow some of those vapors out or dilute them a little bit. Please know that I do think that makes a significant difference. And that's also going to be kind of a lesson or an example that you can show to the teachers to show them how they can mitigate vapors if they've got poor ventilation in there. It's not a great solution by any means at all. And I'm gonna push to say that, if we've got that poor ventilation, that you can see particulates in the air, you can taste things that are wrong in your mouth, metallic taste, solvent taste, anything like that, that poor ventilation needs to be corrected. And that's one of the things that you should identify during your inspection. Make sure when you first go into the school that you know the exit routes, where the fire extinguishers are and where any fire pole stations are. If you are going to be inspecting chemicals in depth, you'll want to make sure you understand how you and how that school is going to leave in case something does go wrong. I would also take a look, find the closest safety shower and eye wash station and make sure they work. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen over the years is that we have stuff stacked in front of safety showers, so we can't access them, or we have safety showers that are old and rusty and don't work, or when you pull the safety shower and try to test it, it stays on and never shuts off and there's no drain. So please make sure you take a look, identify where the safety shower is and if it's in good shape, and then match the level of protection from the safety shower to the level of movement or touching or messing with the chemicals. If the safety shower isn't operating, you need to reduce the amount of handling of those chemicals. Please make sure that you pay attention to that. If you do find something that is old, incompatible, unstable, dangerous, peroxide former, if it's scary, if it's eating its way out of its container, if it's eating its way into the wall, any of those situations, keep in mind that it is still not an emergent situation. And in any of those cases, that chemical has been there for decades and decades. So for you to take and work with the schools for an extra 2 weeks or a month, whatever it takes to get a safety and a hazardous waste disposal company in there for disposal of those chemicals, the chemicals have been laying there for a really long time. They do not constitute evacuation, emergency, or a full-on, event, emergency event. They just don't know where they are. Make sure that you take some pictures and then work with the school to get a chemical hazardous waste company in as quickly as possible. Okay, so please, I also have had folks ask over the years, well, how come you didn't go in Tyvek and in, SCBA or in an APR, air purifying respirator, or anything like that? And what I want you to keep in mind and remember, I worked with one hazardous waste company at the very beginning of this program, so the early 2000s. And before they went in anything, they made a big deal about putting on their booties and putting on their Tyvek suits and making sure that their APRs had organic acid vapor cartridges with particulate cartridges on the top, filters on them as well. And when they were all donned out in their bunny suits, they had to walk through the classroom to get to the stockroom. And what we ended up having happen was we had a whole bunch of students in there and the cell phones went crazy. And the teacher went, what are you doing? I'm in and out of there 400 times a day. I'm around this stuff all the time. Why are you doing this? And they lost a lot of credibility. We know there's exposure in these chemical stock rooms, so we want to mitigate it as much as possible. Conduct your inspections when there aren't students in the classroom at all, if at all possible. But to don that level of personal protective equipment when you've got a teacher standing there that's in and out of there all day really does not help with increasing their confidence in the guidance that you're going to provide to them. So please take that into consideration. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a quick and dirty. You can walk in to a chemical stock room and in the first 5 minutes, you can identify whether or not you've got legacy chemicals that you're dealing with. And when I talk about legacy chemicals, I'm talking about chemicals that have been sitting on those shelves in that chemical stockroom since the 1950s and 60s. Okay. And what happened was the United States was losing the space race in that time. The Russians sent up Sputnik. The United States went crazy and said, "Oh my gosh, we need more scientists," and they pummeled a whole. They just flooded all of the schools with funding to be able to buy whatever chemical they wanted. And the chemical supplier at the time was Mallinckrodt. That was the primary place that everybody got chemicals. So what we still see now is Mallinckrodt chemicals from the 1950s and 60s sitting on shelves. And again, these have not been used up. These are usually 500-gram quantities, and they haven't been used up in, oh gosh, what are we at now? Almost 75 years. So if we haven't needed them for 75 years, a lot of them have also started eating through their containers, eating through their lids. They've degraded over time. This is what I'm referring to when I talk about legacy chemicals. What we did is we approached I can't remember who the company is that owns Mallinckrodt now, but we approached them and we said, "Hey, can you send us your really old labels and tell us how old these are?" And what we did is we identified that the Mallinckrodt script label in the hexagon was from the 1950s. They stopped using that in the 1960s and went to the block lettering for Mallinckrodt. So we know that those chemicals were manufactured. If they have the script Mallinckrodt or the block lettering in the hexagon, we know that those styles of labels have not been used since the 1950s and 60s. So at a glance, you should be able to walk up to any shelf and look. And if you see chemicals with this style of label on them from Mallinckrodt, that tells you all you need to know. You are going to be dealing with legacy chemicals. The other telltale signs of legacy chemicals or chemicals that have been around far, far longer than they should be are chemicals that are packaged in cardboard with paper hats on them, or chemicals that have corks in them. Corks and paper hats haven't been used since the 1920s to around the 1940s. So these are extremely old and likely compromised chemicals. And these are the ones that we need to really focus on to get rid of. A lot of chemicals stored in the 1970s and 80s. That was when we first really started seeing a lot of chemicals stored in plastic containers. And one of the things we know is that chemicals that are stored in plastic containers since the 1970s, the plastic becomes extremely, extremely brittle. So if you do see chemicals with this labeling on them, with the Mallinckrodt name on them, and they look old and they're in plastic containers, be very, very careful if you're trying to move them, because a lot of times what happens is you'll go to pick them up and the sides will collapse in. This is how we know if we have legacy chemicals. This is also how we know if a chemical or if a school has gone through a chemical clean out or not. These chemicals should not be present in the school. Okay, question 2 that you're going to ask. So question 1 was, how old are your chemicals? Question 2, do you use everything that is in your chemical inventory? If they don't have a chemical inventory, advise them that they need to have one. And then ask, do you use everything that is in this stockroom? And if the answer is no, then we've got to start focusing on, okay, well, what are the things that you don't use that we need to get rid of? As you're doing that and as you're having that conversation, you also want to talk to them about the age of the chemicals that are on the shelf, the quantities of certain chemicals that they may have, the integrity of the containers, and the level of risk that is presented by those chemicals. We have a cheat sheet for the chemical level of risk identification. Dave Waddell, who began a Rehab the Lab program in his home state of Washington, developed a list. It has about 1,000 chemicals on it. And he talked to numerous science teachers and actually worked with a nationally recognized science teacher, educator of the year, I believe she was. to go through each of the chemicals and identify, is this too risky, and what age group should the chemicals be used at? If you need that list, please let me know or reach out to Victoria Davis. Vicki also has it, but both of us have copies of that. And I believe it's either on my website now or it'll be on my website in the next few months. The 4 criteria, though, that we have found works best when you're talking with teachers is, okay, what's the age of the chemical? And we want to maximize that to about 10 years. If it's more than 10 years old and it's in a 500 gram quantity, if it hasn't been used up in 10 years, is it really necessary? The quantity of the chemical, we spent some time early on in the webinars helping teachers learn how to calculate what a 5-year supply of chemicals looks like. If they've got 27 500 gram containers and they go through a quarter, 125 grams a year, if they've got 27 500 gram containers, they've got eons worth of chemical. We want to keep in mind that even if it's not a highly dangerous chemical, the more chemicals that we have on the shelf, the more risk we have. The more we have to move chemicals around to get to other chemicals, the more risk we have. So if we can minimize those quantities down to about a 5-year supply, that's really going to be ideal. That'll also make sure that we're using up chemicals before we buy new ones. Integrity of the container is really critical. And I've got some slides at the end that'll show you what happens to shelving when we have chemicals that have either cracked containers, cracked tops, or for some reason they're cross-reacting with other things and growing out of their own containers. The picture here is a picture of arsenic trioxide. Arsenic trioxide is a very, very, very dangerous inhalation hazard. Can you imagine if you're the teacher and you inherit this and you go to move that container because you don't know that arsenic trioxide or arsenic trichloride is going to kill you at a very, very low exposure rate? Those are very fluffy crystals, and we see that a lot. So if we went to move this container, we'd end up contaminating the whole area with what is an acute toxin. I believe that the permissible exposure limit on this is less than 1 part per million. The last category, of course, is that level of risk that I've already talked with you about. If you need that list, if you would like that, please reach out and either Vicki or I will get that to you. You want to make sure that as you're looking through and inspecting and evaluating these chemicals, that you want to see if they're stored by chemical compatibility. If the chemicals are being stored in alphabetical order, that is another red flag. Chemicals should not be being stored in alphabetical order. Now, once they're separated by compatibility class, so let's say we have all the nitrates on one shelf, then the teachers certainly can put those in alphabetical order. But we want to keep the nitrites and the nitrates separated from the salts and separated from the flammables. And the only way that we do that is by working on chemical compatibility storage suggestions. We did a previous webinar on that. And if you need more information, please reach out. Please make sure that acids are stored in acid cabinets and that we don't store any caustics like hydroxides in with them. And then also make sure that the flammables are stored in flam cabinets. One of the things that we often see is that teachers will put oxidizers in flammable cabinets. They seem to think that it makes it safer. It's actually very high risk because the oxidizers can cross-react with the flammables. So make sure that you have an understanding of what that chemical compatibility should look like. Question number 3 that you need to ask is, do we have any air reactive chemicals or pyrophoric chemicals? Now, over the years, these are pictures from Dave Waddell, and I've seen the same thing. If we have chunks of things that are under liquid, that is a big red flag. And if you look at those, if you're an inspector and you come across these, there's 2 different types of chemicals that we see stored under liquid. The first one is air reactive chemicals. And so these are frequently stored under water or under mineral oil. This is what white and yellow phosphorus looks like. And it's crazy, but we have found this at a substantial number of schools. Nobody's using it, thank goodness. A lot of times it's been sitting on the shelf again for 50, 70 years. But yellow phosphorus and white phosphorus are highly air reactive. If something happens and those jars break, those sticks of phosphorus will begin reacting with the air immediately. They'll light themselves on fire. They burn super hot, and they off gas phosphorus pentoxide, which is a really, really dangerous gas. It's acutely toxic as well. Now, this is different from red phosphorus. There's also a chemical called red phosphorus. So we have red, yellow, and white phosphorus, and it's just different chemical states of the same molecule. Red phosphorus is not dangerously air reactive, although if it has been stored in a metal container, it'll look like it is air reactive. It eats its way out of metal containers pretty rapidly. It degrades over time. It is not highly air reactive, but it does off gas phosphine gas. Phosphine gas was a World War I, World War II chemical warfare agent. Red phosphorus is also now heavily regulated by the DEA. It's one of the components used to manufacture methamphetamine illegally. So any of these three that are on site, red phos, white phos, or yellow phos, all need to go and be disposed of. And again, these are containers that we should not mess with. They're very old. A lot of times that glass gets really brittle. We want to have a hazardous waste company come in and take care of these. They are expensive to get rid of. So you're going to have to work with your school district to make sure that they understand what the priority is for getting rid of these, and also how, help them figure out how they're going to pay to get rid of them, because they are very expensive. These are not ones that you can react off in the parking lot. Please absolutely do not do that, because the gases and the vapors, the smoke that comes off of these when they're air reacted is acutely toxic. And also they will eat a hole in your parking lot. They burn so hot, they eat a hole in the parking lot. Please follow up to make sure, if you do come across these, to make sure that these have been disposed of properly. The next question to ask is, are there any water reactive chemicals? A lot of teachers will like to keep around metallic potassium or metallic sodium. It's kind of a wow factor because it's water reactive. They can cut off a little chunk of it, toss it into a beaker of water, and it pops and lights on fire and smokes, does all kinds of crazy stuff. These are extremely water reactive. There's a list of them there that I've made for you. It might not be all inclusive, but it's pretty close. But these are the ones that we predominantly see: metallic sodium, metallic potassium, metallic lithium. Yes, that's the same lithium that's in lithium batteries. Different structure, different chemical structure. Metallic lithium is a solid and looks real shiny and shimmery. Calcium carbide, and also phosphorus pentoxide. When exposed to water, all of these will react very violently. They burn very hot. You can't stop the reaction once it starts. They pop, they explode, and essentially what they do is they blow little chunks of themselves all over the place, which then light on fire even more. A lot of times I've seen schools store these in the freezer or in the refrigerator or in a flammables cabinet. Those are all very, very bad choices. They need to be kept in an isolated area. They should also be stored in secondary containment, and they need to be locked down. This is one of the targets that students will go after if they're trying to steal chemicals, is metallic lithium, metallic sodium and metallic potassium. Metallic lithium can be used in methamphetamine manufacturing as well. So we want to make sure that we keep all of these locked down. Exposure to atmospheric humidity is enough to begin reactions with these chemicals. That means that every time, if you've got a large chunk of metallic sodium, which we've seen a lot in schools, the teachers will take it out of liquid and cut off a very small slice of it, and then put that chunk back under liquid. Usually it's mineral oil. The problem is you do that 2 or 3 times a year over a period of 20 or 30 or 50 or 80 years. What happens is the exterior coating begins to react with things. And one of the things that we found is that the older these particular earth metals are, metallic sodium, metallic potassium, and lithium, the older they are and the more they've been exposed to oxygen, they can form a highly explosive exterior crust. The key way to identify whether or not they have this dangerous exterior crust on them is by looking at the color. If they're that white, shimmery, silvery look under liquid, that means they're relatively new. They're in good shape. And they always need to be stored under liquid. If you come across, in 2 instances over 30 years, I came across metallic sodium that was stored in a dry environment. That is a really, really bad idea. If that color has changed from that shiny silvery color to white or black, those are indicators that it's formed hydroxides, and the exterior crust of that particular sample is reactive and it's corrosive. If they've moved into the yellow-orange category, those are superoxides that have formed on that crust. Not only is that corrosive, but it's water reactive and it's highly unstable. It can explode. And then when we reach the red point, now it's converted to a chemical called ozonide, which is highly reactive and very explosive. There are small quantities of metallic sodium, potassium, and lithium that are sold by one of the chemical supply companies, teeny tiny quantities, less than a gram a piece. They offer teachers the opportunity to use those chemicals and demonstrate with them without running into this issue of superoxide formation and instability. So take a look. If they are using any water reactive chemicals, those are ones that we need to really pay attention to, the quantity that they have on site and the color of that chemical. If that color is turned to, excuse me, yellow, orange, or red, do not move the container, do not move the chemical. It's now become unstable enough that this is a bomb squad visit or a high hazard chemical company visit. Please let me know if you have any questions as we're going through these. I know I'm zipping through them pretty quickly. The next question that you want to ask are there any toxic metals? Now, if you phrase it that way, your teachers are going to look at you and go, no, of course I don't work with any toxic metals. So you have to ask the questions a little bit differently. And in that second, in our second bullet point, I list off some of the following metals that are considered toxic. Do you have any chemicals that have arsenic in them, or cadmium, chromium, lead, mercury, silver, or selenium? All of those are also heavily regulated by EPA. They can't go down the drain. They can't go in the trash. So we want to know if the teachers are using them. If they are using them, where's the waste? Are they collecting it and managing it? If they still have mercury on site, and I know there was a huge effort several years ago to remove, particularly in Vermont, all mercury thermometers and all sources of mercury at school. If that has not been done, if a school hasn't participated in that removal of mercury, I would encourage you to ask about that, ask how much mercury they have, and work with the school to make sure that they're getting rid of it. There's really no excuse for a K-12 to have even one mercury thermometer. It's just too dangerous. If they do have something like that present, they need to have a mercury spill kit and they need to know how to use it. The other thing is we want to make sure that they're not using any of these chemicals in things like flame testing, where we're aerosolizing those molecules that are dangerous and bioaccumulative. Not only are the teachers being exposed, but the students are being exposed. So critical one for you to ask about. Next one, are there any peroxide formers? Now this gets a little hairy. Before you go to the school, if you're going to be conducting inspections, I would encourage you to go out to any of the universities. It's particularly the University of California at San Diego, or University of California at UC Davis. They will have lists of peroxidizable chemicals. These are chemicals that when we open them and expose them to atmosphere, to oxygen, they begin to degrade and they form what are called peroxides or superoxides. Now, whenever I say peroxide, everybody thinks, okay, it's like the 3% hydrogen peroxide that you get at the pharmacy. No, not the same at all. These are chemicals that form peroxides to the extent that those peroxide crystals are highly exothermic. They like to explode when they are disrupted. A lot of times these peroxide crystals will form underneath the cap or on the inside of the bottle, and you can't see them. So they're very dangerous. One of the key chemicals that I just ran into this a year ago, isopropanol. We have a lot, and yeah, isopropanol, like what you get at the grocery store, what you get at the pharmacy. 99% isopropanol does not have stabilizers in it, and it can form peroxides. You'll see on the photos, the bottom row of the photo on the far left, that's a peroxide test strip in a squirt peroxide bottle that was found at an industrial an industrial QA lab, quality assurance lab. It had enough peroxides in it that isopropanol had become very, very unstable. Others common chemicals that we see that are peroxide formers: ethyl ether, cyclohexene, acetaldehyde, 1,4-dioxane, vinyl chloride. There's a whole list of them. And what I have found, with the exception of isopropanol, most of the teachers are not using any of these unless they're teaching organic chemistry. And then there's that they need to make sure that they're turning those chemicals over frequently enough, using them and disposing of any excess, that they don't allow peroxide formation to take place. This is one where we need to download a list ahead of time and then ask the teachers, do you have any of these? These are peroxide formers that can be really dangerous. The next question number 7, do you have any other unstable chemicals such as picric acid? Do you have colloidine, nitrocellulose, nitrobenzene, dinitrophenol? If a chemical has the word nitro in it, we want to stop and pay attention. Picric acid, we don't see a whole lot. It's a dry yellow powder. When it's dry, it's supposed to be underwater. When it's dry like that, it's really, really explosive. You can see the photo, the bottom on the right is an explosion with picric acid. That was a very small amount, less than an ounce of picric acid, and it resulted in that large of a detonation. It blew the sandbags apart. That's pretty rare. The bomb squad had found it, and they detonated it on site. On the top photos on the right, the crystalline stuff in the container, that's nitrocellulose. Also can be extremely shock sensitive and decide to detonate just on a whim. Nitrobenzene is right next to it. This was a school that really had a lot of problems. Please make sure that if you see legacy chemicals, that's a red flag that you should be asking about these. It is in almost all of the schools. In fact, a very, very, very high percentage of the schools that had legacy chemicals also have all of these unstables. A lot of these might be able to be managed through an exercise with the bomb squad. A better option probably is to be calling a high hazard chemical company for some stabilization assistance. It's very expensive, but pretty warranted. Question 8, do you have any acute toxins? And I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here. We've only got about 11 minutes left, and I've got quite a bit of material to cover. Acute toxins would be things like cyanides, potassium and sodium cyanide, even ferrocyanides and ferrocyanide, like potassium ferrocyanide, potassium ferrocyanide. A lot of times our AP level chemistry classes will have those. Potassium and sodium cyanide, calcium cyanide are all extremely, extremely dangerous, highly reactive with acids, and they off-gas hydrogen cyanide gas, which is what was used in the death chambers at in World War II by the Nazis. So these are really wicked chemicals. There is really no reason to have them on site. If a school does have potassium ferro or potassium ferrous cyanide, there might be some use in an AP chemistry class. They need to have tiny doses or tiny quantities, excuse me, tiny quantities, and they need to be kept under lockdown. Because again, these are very dangerous chemicals. And during webinar 5, we talked about how do you evaluate toxicity using the safety data sheet. And if you need a little refresher on that, I'm going to encourage you to go take a look at that. All of the cyanides, antimony, there are a number of them. If they have a PEL or an REL, recommended exposure limit or a permissible exposure limit of less than 50 parts per million, then the risk associated with that chemical probably exceeds the utility of having the chemical around. All right, next question. Question 9 is, do you have any radioactives? If a school has legacy chemicals, it's highly likely that they also have a big yellow wooden box someplace that has a Geiger counter in it. A lot of times we found these in physics labs or physics classrooms. And the big yellow wooden boxes were passed out in the 1960s and 70s by the civil support teams, I think is what they were called. They passed them out so that schools would have Geiger counters in the event that we were attacked and we needed to identify if we were being exposed to radiation. A lot of times those are still sitting around. You'll see the little Geiger counter up at the top. It's that yellow box looking thing. And that isn't the problem. It's definitely not a problem to have the Geiger counter and teach students how to use it. Really, really fascinating stuff. The problem is that we kept things, a lot of science teachers or physics teachers kept things that made it click. So we kept radioactives. I'm going to tell you that any radioactives that are powdered or liquid should not be in the school. They're impossible to clean up. They're very difficult to dispose of. They shouldn't be in the schools. There's really no utility for them. Now, we do occasionally have small sources. That's what's in the box down below. Small sources, the little round things, are sources that make the Geiger counter click. As long as they're not leaking and they're in good shape, not a problem to use those. Also, you'll see the orange Fiesta ware. We had teachers over the years that would collect orange Fiesta ware. Quite a bit of radiation still coming off of those, so I would really advise to get rid of the Fiesta ware, as well as anything that is a liquid or anything that is a powder. We also occasionally found these miniature radioisotope mini generators. I rarely found all of the pieces there, but we worked with our local, I actually worked with our Department of Public Health's Radiological Bureau to identify disposal options. It's really tough to get dispose of any radiologicals, so you'll need to call in some help from colleagues to figure out how to dispose of those. All right, next question is, do you have any solvents? And almost all labs are going to have solvents. And by this, I mean acetone, isopropanol, sometimes methanol. You'll want to identify and make sure that all the solvents are stored in the flammables cabinet. You'll want to make sure that they're in small quantities. And if we do have any legacy chemicals here, this is the place where we can find a lot of peroxide formers. Finally, if a school is using solvents, you'll want to ask them if they're using them on the bench top or under a fume hood. Frequently, we found over the years that they were using them on the bench top, and they would load up their classrooms with volatile organic compounds, which would be a real dangerous exposure situation for both students and teachers. Solvents should only be used under the fume hood. If they are in use, ask to see where the waste container is. Almost all solvents have flash points that are low enough that make them considered, used solvents are considered hazardous waste due to their flash point. So you'll want to see, if they have a disposal option for those. All right, I did not cover all chemical classes today, but at least I feel like I hit on the most important ones for you to be paying attention to when you're on site conducting an inspection, or if you're an administrator and you're going to go down and take a look around, and just those are the questions that you can ask. Now, what are we going to do if we do find bad stuff? If we find legacy chemicals, if we find a container of ethyl ether, if we find stuff that looks like the picture where exterior contamination is occurring and crystallized, before you react, before you even start your inspection, make a plan. What are you going to do? What are the steps that you're going to take if you find any of these high hazards? If you find anything that is peroxidizable, unstable, highly reactive, keep in mind that the chemical hazardous waste disposal companies often have high hazard teams that can come in and stabilize those and dispose of them. You could also work with your local bomb squad to determine if it's a container, for example, of ethyl ether, there's not going to be anything residual left if they remove that to the exterior of the school and then detonate it. That's not going to work if you have something like mercury fulminate, where the mercury is still going to be residual and we end up with environmental contamination. In that case, we call the chemical waste company the high haz company. Identify resources in your community before you even start looking. Who are you going to call? If you do find radioactives, one of the best options is to call Department of Public Health or potentially even a local university or a military base. Those are the folks that typically have radioactive materials to get rid of. Sometimes hospitals do too, and you could ask at the hospital how they dispose of their radioactive waste. But identify those resources up front. Finally, and I didn't include this slide on controlled substances, but every once in a while we will find something like red phosphorus, which is regulated by the DEA. You can talk with the DEA ahead of time and, oh, great, thank you. You can talk with the DEA ahead of time and make sure that you know what to do or who to call if you come across any of these. If you have any specific questions, reach out to the local hazardous waste company and see if they can assist you. They have a lot of resources. They can be very helpful, and they were one of the key players when we cleaned out a lot of this stuff in Iowa. We did large scale legacy chemical cleanouts in the early 2000s up until about 2008 in Iowa. We removed over 500,000 pounds of acutely toxic, highly reactive, peroxidizable, radioactive, controlled substances, you name it, we found it. And we partnered with one chemical disposal company and were able to negotiate a significant discount for teachers because we were going to be sending so much material to them for disposal, so much waste to them for disposal. If you have any specific questions about how we did that, who we used, you're welcome to either call me or send me an email, and I'm happy to help you identify some resources because I know that's really tough. Next, after you identify the hazardous waste disposal company, while you're in kind of poking around, there's some other things that you need to keep an eye out for during the inspection. Contamination on pipes, on the exterior pipes in particular, or pipes that look like they're corroded, strong indicator that we're putting things down the drain we shouldn't be. If we have discoloration around the drain, tells us we're probably putting things down the drain that we shouldn't. Want to make sure that we have working safety showers and that we have clear access to them. You can see from the middle photo on the top there, that's what we ran into a lot is even if they had a beautiful, fantastic plumbed working safety shower with a drain, it was often just completely covered by all kinds of material. You want to make sure that you've got appropriate personal protective equipment and that the students have personal protective equipment along with the teacher. It includes things like safety glasses, goggles, or chemical resistant gloves. The more that you can increase your knowledge of hazardous waste regulations and the more sources that you can identify that will help you, the lower those disposal costs are going to be for schools. It really is worth the upfront time and investment to identify good resources at the state level. When you do find things as inspectors, as administrators, that really present way more risk than perhaps a teacher is assessing correctly, you need to very, very clearly state to them that they need to dispose of it. And that's probably one of the things that I've seen is most challenging over the years. We'll have inspectors identify things, they won't follow up, and they won't clearly state to teachers, you need to get rid of this. We want to evaluate the chemical storage, take a look at secondary containment, take a look at lips on the front of shelving, evaluate fire extinguishers. One of the other things that showed up time and time again, and you can see this in the bottom left picture, that's an acid cabinet, and it's an old acid cabinet. They've got fantastic secondary containment, but the problem is the clips on that shelf were completely corroded. That was just a collapsed shelf waiting to happen. And we had a large quantity of really infrequently used acids. It's fine if teachers are going to use sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, phosphoric acid, but they really should be buying smaller quantities and using them up. Make sure that you have time to take a look at the school's chemical hygiene plan, ask who their chemical hygiene officer is or their safety officer is, and advise them if there's any improvements. Take a look at what spill response procedures they have. And if it's something, make sure that you help the teachers understand that if they don't know how to respond to a spill safely, their number one thing should be evacuating students from the room in the school. They need to understand that evacuating in the event that something spills and is really dangerous is the best option. One of the things on the bottom right that I want to point out to you is if you find, this is wooden shelving, and this is where a legacy chemical sat and ate through its container and tried to light the shelf on fire. And this has happened time and time again. I've seen this at numerous schools. Please take a look at the shelving, the shelf stability, the materials that the shelves are made of. Metal shelving should not be used in chemical storage rooms. It should be wooden and then preferentially be lined with a plastic liner, like what is sitting under the acid container on the picture on the bottom on the left. We want to make sure that glassware, broken glassware, has a place to go. One of the things that I always seem to find, though, is broken glassware that's contaminated is usually all commingled together. That's another opportunity for those chemicals to cross-react. Also, on the picture in the upper right is the same. It's that it's the flam container that's on the left. That's just the open version of it. And what you'll see in there is broken glass and a broken mercury thermometer. And the mercury thermometer is leaking and has leaked all through that container, and it's actually corroding the bottom of the metal container. So we need to have strategies and disposal for broken glassware separate from broken mercury thermometers or mercury containing materials, and those need to be separate from a flam storage container. So this is it's really tough, and I'm really in the weeds on that, but it's critical that you understand that. And again, those inspection opportunities are the chance for you to go in and really take a look at what's going on in that school. Okay, now this slide I don't like at all, but I think you need to see it. There are a couple of things that are happening across the United States, and one is that we have a couple of demonstrations that are being taught by teachers that are extremely dangerous. There's an agency called the Chemical Safety Board, and if you would like, reach out to me on email and I'll send you a link to some of their educational videos that they've produced in response to students and teachers being injured when these experiments have gone awry. The first experiment that it's called the rainbow flame test. And what you see here is Malachi. This is Malachi McFadden. He's a student. He was in junior high in 2019 in Georgia. And he's one of several across the country sitting in the front row watching this flame test demonstration, the rainbow flame test. And the isopropanol caught on fire and burned him significantly. And Malachi will have burn scars for the rest of his life now. There's also another chemical experiment called the whoosh experiment, which is essentially a flammable vapor in a very large plastic or 5-gallon glass water bottle type thing that's lit on fire, and it makes a whoosh noise. It's extremely, extremely dangerous. If you don't get the timing right, if you get too much isopropanol or methanol, which is even worse, if you get the flammable solvent being used in the wrong proportion, if you take too long to light it on fire, you end up with an incorrect amount of flammable vapor, and the container blows up. Very, very dangerous, very bad problem. On the left, you'll see some photos of a school that actually caught on fire. This was really interesting. In the early 2000s, I was at a building and grounds conference in Des Moines. I had taken some pictures of some of the problems that I found in some schools, but I couldn't get any engagement from any of our Department of Ed, Department of Public Health, anybody. I couldn't get anybody engaged. Well, I learned in Iowa, we have one primary insurance contractor, EMC Insurance, that handled all of the property casualty claims for schools in the state of Iowa. I was at this building and grounds conference, and I had a little table and a little booth to talk about chemical safety. And I went down and I talked to the gentleman at the EMC booth, and I said, I really think that we need to talk about this. I'm finding some really big problems. And he kind of went, oh, yeah, we're seeing some problems too, but really nothing's really happened. About 3 months later, I got a phone call, and EMC said, you know what? We're ready to talk to you about this. They had insured the Andale, Kansas high school. This was the old high school, and they were getting ready to move to the new high school. They were boxing up chemicals from the chemical stock room, and something caused a reaction. Luckily, it was overnight. The boxes in the lab caught on fire, but it did cause about $600,000 in damage to the school. EMC began really paying attention then, and they actually formed a partnership with us at the time, and we cleaned out about 94-98% of the schools in Iowa, and that's when we took out 500,000 pounds plus of chemicals. Please ask if your science teachers are conducting the whoosh experiment or the rainbow flame experiment. Both of them, if they don't have a safety shield in between them and the students and a whole bunch of other safety precautions, they're too dangerous. Oh, apologies. Okay. The next webinar that we're going to talk about is for administrators and insurance carriers on the roles that you guys play in enforcement and understanding of regulations, and what to do when you have a bad player. Over the years, I have had a couple of times where we've had rough interactions with some teachers that didn't want to give up their chemicals, didn't want to give up their dangerous experiments. And so I'm happy to share with you some of the strategies that those administrators put into place. Steps to take today: evaluate your inspection strategy. Make sure that you understand what you're going to be looking for. If you need help with that, please reach out. Identify partners if you find something that is going sideways. Who can you call that will help you identify what to do and what steps to take? Talk with teachers and staff and administrators and ask how you can help them improve safety. They really want to. Our teachers, I've never had a teacher over 30 years that has told me, nah, safe enough. Never had that happen. They always want to make sure they're doing the safest thing possible. Learn what you should watch for and update and enhance your training and your understanding for not only yourself, but for fellow inspectors. All right, I went over today. I apologize. There was a lot of material to cover, and as I told Vicki, this is probably the topic that I'm most passionate about because I've just seen so many troubles. Is there anybody that has any questions today that I can help with? We're going to give it just a few minutes. I also understand if you all have to leave.
Becky, did you see the one question there in the?
I did not. Oops. No, I'm not seeing a question in
Okay.
the chat.
It says, can you share an inspection questionnaire with this info?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, Gosh, I don't think I have any. It's been so long since I've completed an inspection. All of my materials would be pretty old. Um, I would be certainly happy to evaluate the inspection that you're currently using and make some suggestions on how to improve it, but I don't believe I have anything that's current. I apologize. I'm sorry. Vicky, maybe that should be something else that we work on.
Add it to the list.
Perfect. All right. Do we have any other questions today? I want to take time just to say thank you again for, I know it's tough to get an hour out of your schedule. Really, truly appreciate you being involved with us today and listening in. I believe the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission now has a number of these webinars up on their website. And so you're welcome to go take a look. If you do need links to them, shoot an email over to me. Let me get to my email. Apologize again. There we go. My email is available to you. Also my phone number, and I'm happy to help with whatever I can. Thank you. Thanks so much. I appreciate it. All right, Vicky, anything else?
I don't think so. Thank you so much, Becky.
Okay, thanks so much. And Rosa, do you want to stop the recording?